Two, that they're the ones who have been transformed. That they're the ones who have been evangelized by the process. So time and again when I worked with YWAM and they were going on these short-term missions, I had to keep saying, you think you're going out there to transform those people. But I bet when you come back, they'll have shown you nothing but grace, and it will be you who has changed. You think you're going out to reach these unreached people, but that's where you have to go, precisely in order to be reached. And so mission becomes, for me, it should be a much more humble enterprise, where you're actually going, it's me who's trying to be evangelized. It's me who needs to be touched. It's me who needs to be transformed. And actually by having that attitude, other people paradoxically be much more interested in listening to what you have to say. When you come in weakness and in powerlessness, people will then be more interested in what you're doing. We'll talk about that more in the third session, practically, of how we do that in ICON. For example, in ICON we have a group called the Evandalism Project, where we go out to be evangelized. We go and we listen to other people and we're transformed in the encounter with others. Trying to reclaim the idea that this idea of mission is not some sort of one-way thing, but it's what I do in order to be transformed. I also mentioned last night, the idea that sometimes this stuff is imposed, like an order discourse. I used the example of, if I'm a figure of authority and I tell you to close the door, you have to close the door whether you like me or not, whether you're a good person or not. But if I say, it's a little bit chilly in here, if you're a nice person, you'll close the door, and if you're not, you won't. And how a lot of mission seems to be orientated like an order discourse. The successful evangelist is the one who can so convince you that God exists, that Christ exists, that Christ died for you, all of that stuff. You're so convinced that whether you're a nice person or not, whether you're being touched by the Spirit of God, whether you're seduced by this message or not, you have to accept. Because it's just so patently obvious. And that's a horrible thing. I mean, imagine that. People say, why does God not just open the clouds and say, here I am? Or, that kind of facile objection. You go, well, if God did, that would be an order discourse. Everyone would bow their knees. But not because they've been touched, not because they've been transformed, simply because they had to. Because there was no other way to get out of it. Whereas hints are like parables. They're like an aroma. And they speak to the heart. And so, a lot of a mission seems to be this order-based discourse. And there's two types. There's the order-based discourse of reason, where you kind of use apologetics to try to convince the other person that you're right. And the idea is the better your apologetics, the more you can beat them in the argument to the point that they have to kind of accept what you're saying. And the other is the power discourse of miracle, which is used in some churches where you kind of try to do something, some sort of miraculous event, transformative event, which then it makes the person go, my goodness, and then accept. Both of them, I think, are profoundly problematic. Not because I don't think we should be praying for people and seeing some wonderful things take place, but because I don't think that's what we should be using in order to get people to embrace faith. Jesus would often say, whenever he heals someone, don't tell anybody. Not tell people, don't tell anyone. Almost that's not the point. The point is not to use this as a crazy discourse so as to get people in. People want signs. I don't want to give them signs. I'm not doing these miracles so as people can have some sort of crazy sign and accept me. I'm doing it because I love. I'm doing it because I want to transform people's lives. And the last thing I want is people coming to me and embracing me because of some spectacle that they see. What a horrible thing, We have polytechnics and fireworks, and we can get people in because of that. So I'm interested in this idea of powerless mission, where we come in weakness rather than in strength, and we create spaces where we can journey together. Okay, but the main thing I did last night was I was exploring how we've got this notion that God becomes an answer to a question. That we try to get people to be worried about their salvation or to be worried about the world lacking meaning or whatever it is. We try to get them to be concerned about that, and then God is the answer. God is the reason why, everything's going to work out okay, and that we'll be fine. And when this happens, I talked about how God becomes, for Bonhoeffer, this deus ex machina, this thing that we wind into existence to make us feel better. What we bring in whenever we're facing suffering. We bring in whenever we're scared of death. We bring in whenever we can't explain something. And the problem then for Bonhoeffer is that God just gets pushed more and more to the sidelines. God becomes the thing that we use. Basically, God becomes the God of the gaps. The word we use when we can't describe something. When we don't know how something works, we bring God in. For Bonhoeffer, more and more people don't need that God. And even if they did, it seems like a God that as a crutch. That's why Nietzsche said alcohol and religion are two great evils. He says, because if you get drunk all the time, it's a way to escape reality. And if you go to church all the time, it's a way of escaping reality. Of kind of like not facing up to your actual existence and what's going on. And so last night I talked about this idea of fetish. You know, the church becomes the object that we embrace so that we don't have to feel the full impact of our everyday existence. I also talked about how whenever God enters as an idea, we become practical unbelievers. We're theoretical believers. We believe in our heads, but we kind of don't necessarily believe in our lives. We don't necessarily live that out, and we engage in the ironic gesture. And then finally, the kind of interesting stuff I was trying to explore was showing how what we often do is we get the church to believe on our behalf. That we don't really believe, and we kind of realize early on in our Christian life that doubt is part of our existence. You know, we all are in the dark. You know, most of us haven't thought that much about life, that we can think that after a couple of hours of reading or reflection, we can somehow have some great access into the truth. And we realize, I'm always acting in fear and trembling. And I talked about how that's a really good thing, with the idea of marriage and stuff like that our doubt doesn't take away from our faith. It actually adds to it. But then I was saying how we still want certainty. We still want certainty. So what we've done is we've placed a certainty into our church structures themselves. So we embrace doubt. And so I talk to everybody here, and everybody goes, yeah, of course. I'm not 100% sure. Of course I have doubts and uncertainties. Of course. And then I watch what we do when we go to church. And we express certainty and absolute conviction. And it all comes out in the liturgies, in the sermons, in the songs. And in a way, what we've done, I can't go into the details if you weren't there last night. I'm sure most of you were there last night. But the idea is then it believes on our behalf. And we believe because the pastor believes. Hence, if you're in the church, you can have lots of people doubting, as long as the pastor doesn't doubt. When the pastor doubts, there's real trouble. Because why? Well, because in a sense the pastor's believing on my behalf. If you start singing songs in church which express anger at God or doubt or uncertainty and all of that, it could cause a real dissonance within the church itself. You could actually cause a real problem. Not because people don't believe that. Yeah, of course I doubt and I have uncertainties, but when it's actually in the structure itself, it would cause a problem. Because the structure is the one place where we don't allow doubt to exist. I was kind of beginning to try to critique that, and I was saying how, and I'll maybe talk about this afternoon, that perhaps the church should be the very place where we allow that doubt to be expressed in our worship songs, in our sermons, in our liturgies. That we begin to show that doubt isn't something that takes away from the life of faith, but actually can kind of add to it and contribute to it, that it's a virtue. Anybody want to ask any questions very briefly before we move on?
Just a technical question. You referred to the close the door command as an order discourse. The other was? Hint
discourse, yeah. So but I ordered, and I'm not sure where I got those words from, but I think it was some sort of psychoanalytic thing, I'm guessing. But I thought it was quite insightful. Because you see Jesus always kind of, like giving these really bizarre answers to people. Never kind of saying it straight out. It always seems to be trying to speak to those with ears to hear. And I love that passage. I speak to those with ears to hear. That hint.